What does it mean when a father erases his son's very name from a royal decree? Not just a whisper in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, not just a rumor in the tabloids, but an official stroke of a pen, signed by King Charles, witnessed and reinforced by Princess Anne. Can you imagine the weight of that moment? Centuries of tradition, titles, and duties, all rewritten in silence, with one name missing. Prince Harry, the boy once cradled by Diana, the young man who marched behind her coffin, the soldier who fought in Afghanistan, the husband, the father, the spare. Now, in one sweep, the erased. Let me ask you this. How do you erase blood? How do you strike out a prince without striking out the very idea of monarchy? Because that's what happened. Or at least, that's what the world has begun to realize. A signature can do what years of scandal, tabloid frenzy, and public rebellion could not. It can silence. It can exclude. It can destroy legacy with chilling precision. That's the story we're diving into today. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Picture the scene. A dimly lit chamber inside Buckingham Palace. The air heavy, not with ceremony, but with cold inevitability. No cameras. No golden pens lined up for display. Just a document laid on a polished wooden table. King Charles leaning over it, his hand trembling slightly, not just from age, but from the enormity of the decision. Beside him, Princess Anne, stone-faced, determined. Her eyes, sharp as steel, never leaving the parchment. And then, the moment. Ink flows, signatures dry, history shifts. When that document is archived, when the records are stored, one detail will leap out at anyone brave enough to look. The name of Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, is nowhere to be found. But why? Why now? Why would a father, already embroiled in public drama with his son, take such an extreme step? And why would Princess Anne, the loyal daughter of Elizabeth II, lend her own authority to this act? That's the heart of this exposé. And let me warn you, it's not just about family squabbles or sibling rivalry. This is about survival, the survival of the monarchy itself. Ask yourself this. Why does this story matter now? Isn't Harry already estranged? Isn't Meghan already outside the palace gates? Haven't they both walked away from titles, duties, and responsibilities? On the surface, yes. But the monarchy runs on symbolism, on names, on recognition. Once a royal is written into decrees, their place in history is secured, no matter what happens. To erase a name is to erase permanence. To remove Harry from a royal decree is to say to the world, this man is no longer one of us. He is no longer protected by the institution. He is no longer bound by its privileges, nor its burdens. He is, in essence, cast out. Do you feel the weight of that? Because I do. And it's not just symbolic. It's deeply personal. Imagine being Harry, once told he was the spare, now realizing he's not even that. Spare implies presence, even if secondary. Erased means absence. Nothing. A void where his name should be. And that, my friends, is colder than exile. But here's where things get more twisted. This wasn't Charles acting alone. Princess Anne was not just present, but instrumental. Why? What role does she play in this brutal rewriting of royal legacy? And has long been seen as the monarchy's backbone. No nonsense. Duty first, unflinching. She has no patience for drama, no time for scandal. And in her eyes, Harry and Meghan's departure wasn't just a betrayal. It was a direct threat to the crown's stability. Could it be that she became the enforcer, the one who pushed Charles to do what he himself struggled to do? Was it, and who whispered, it's time to cut him out, once and for all? That's a possibility we cannot ignore. And yet, there's a contradiction here. Isn't the monarchy supposed to be about family, unity, continuity? Charles, who once spoke of wanting a slimmed-down monarchy, has now gone further than slimming. He's amputated. What does that say about his vision for the future? What does it say about William's role as heir, watching this unfold in silence? Because make no mistake, William's silence is deafening. He didn't protest. He didn't defend. He didn't even intervene. He allowed it to happen, perhaps even quietly welcomed it. And that tells us something about where this family is heading. Let me ask you another question. When you think of Diana, what comes to mind? Her compassion? Her fight against injustice? Her determination to protect her sons from the cold machinery of the crown? Can you imagine how she would react? knowing her youngest son's name has been deliberately removed from a decree signed by the very man she once loved and the sister-in-law she once respected? Would she see it as justice? Betrayal? Or would she simply shake her head and say, "This is exactly what I feared"? Because isn't this the very fate Diana warned about? The monarchy consuming its own, sacrificing family at the altar of survival? But let's not stop there. Think about the wider world. What message does this send to the British public? To the Commonwealth? To America, where Harry and Meghan have built their new lives? To erase a prince is not just a private matter, it's a global signal. It tells allies, enemies, and ordinary citizens that the monarchy is ruthless, that it will protect itself at any cost. And it raises another chilling question. If they can erase Harry, who else can they erase? Now here's where I want to pause and speak directly to you. Do you think this was justified? Do you believe the monarchy has the right to cut away even its own blood in the name of survival? Or do you think this was an act of cruelty, a betrayal of family, a punishment too harsh for any father to impose on his son? I want you to hold that thought, because as this story unfolds, you'll see why this question matters more than ever. Let's return to that chamber. The ink is dry. The signatures stand. The document is sealed. On the surface, just another piece of royal paperwork. But beneath, a ticking time bomb. Because secrets never stay secret for long. And this decree, this erasure, cannot be hidden forever. Someone will leak. Someone will whisper. And when they do, the fallout will be catastrophic. So here we are, at the edge of revelation. A royal father and sister have taken the most drastic step imaginable, erasing Prince Harry's name from a decree. The question is not just why, but what happens next. How will Harry respond? How will Meghan react? How will the world interpret this silent strike against the man once called despair? And perhaps most importantly, what does this mean for the monarchy's future? Because make no mistake, this is not just a story about one name missing on a piece of parchment. This is a story about identity, about loyalty, about betrayal, about the lengths to which a centuries-old institution will go to protect itself. And as we pull back the curtain, layer by layer, you will see the contradictions, the ironies, the emotional landmines hidden beneath this act of erasure. But before we uncover the furious battles, the whispered confrontations, the leaks to the press, and the fallout across 2 continents, let's linger on this moment. The silence of that chamber, the stillness of the parchment, the sharp, undeniable absence of one name. Prince Harry, gone, struck out, erased. And here's the cliffhanger. If this decree was the beginning of Harry's official erasure, then what followed was nothing short of a royal war. Because once the world discovered the truth, the monarchy's greatest secrets began to unravel. And no one, neither Charles, nor Anne, nor Harry himself, was prepared for the storm that followed. If this decree was the beginning of Harry's official erasure, then what followed was nothing short of a royal war. But let's rewind to the very moment it all began. The stroke of a pen, that single motion, that simple act. Can something so small carry the weight of betrayal, history, and destiny all at once? Think about it. In your life, what's the most powerful thing you've ever signed? Maybe a job contract, a marriage certificate, a mortgage. One piece of paper, one pen, one signature, and suddenly, everything changes. Now multiply that by centuries of tradition, add the throne of England, and imagine the signature belonging to King Charles III. Do you feel the weight of it? Because that's what we're talking about here. A royal decree. And with one stroke, Harry's name was no more. Now, let's set the stage. It wasn't a public affair. There was no red carpet, no flashing cameras, no ceremonial handshakes for photographers to capture. This was done quietly, almost in secret, in one of the palace's inner chambers. The kind of room that smells of old wood and ancient decisions. The kind of room where history is written, rewritten, and sometimes erased. Charles sat there, the pen between his fingers. His hand shook, not just from age, though age plays its part, but from something deeper, conflict. This wasn't just the act of a king. This was the act of a father. And fathers, no matter how powerful, no matter how ruthless, do not erase their children lightly. But then, beside him, was Anne, the Princess Royal, the sister who has never wavered, the one who does not bend under pressure, who carries the monarchy's burden without complaint. She was the anchor, the steel in the room. Some say her eyes never left Charles's hand as he lowered the pen. Did she guide him? Did she pressure him? Did she, in her stern silence, remind him of duty over blood? Now here's where it gets haunting. Royal decrees aren't just paperwork. They're history books written in real time. They outlive kings, queens, scandals, and centuries. Once written, they're permanent. Future historians will study them. They will say, this is what Charles chose. This is what and witnessed. This is what was erased. And when that decree is opened decades from now, one question will echo louder than all the others. Why was Harry's name missing? Pause and picture it. The document lists obligations, rights, acknowledgments. Names carefully chosen, inked in with deliberate purpose. William's there, naturally. Anne's there, her loyalty undeniable. Other key figures, too, present in black ink. But then the gap. The absence. No Harry. The silence of his name screams louder than words ever could. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a clerical oversight. It was deliberate, cold, intentional. Ask yourself, how do you think Harry felt when whispers of this decree reached his ears? Was he furious? Or was he heartbroken? Perhaps both. Because this wasn't just about politics or monarchy. This was about a father's decision to erase his son. Imagine receiving that news. Imagine knowing you no longer exist in the institution that defined your entire life. What would that do to you? But here's the contradiction that makes this story so captivating. Charles has always spoken of wanting to modernize the monarchy, to make it leaner, to cut costs, to focus on the direct line of succession. In that light, some might argue, Harry's exclusion was logical, practical, a simple trimming of excess. Yet, when you look deeper, when you consider the emotional undertones, it becomes clear this wasn't just modernization. This was punishment. This was a father striking his son out of history for daring to rebel, for daring to step outside the palace walls and speak freely, for daring to expose the monarchy to scrutiny. And Anne, her role cannot be ignored. She has always despised scandal, despised drama. To her, the monarchy is a duty, a service, a relentless march forward. Harry and Meghan's Netflix deals, their Oprah interview, their public grievances, all of it was, in her eyes, betrayal. For Anne, the only path forward was to excise the rot. And so, she stood by Charles as he signed. Now, think of the irony. Harry once marched proudly in military uniform, saluting under the same flag his grandmother, the Queen, embodied. He once represented Britain on the world stage, shaking hands, giving speeches, honoring the crown. And yet, years later, his name could not even find a place on a sheet of paper. Isn't that cruel? Isn't that breathtakingly cold? But here's the twist. By erasing Harry, did Charles and Anne actually make him more powerful? Sometimes, the attempt to silence a voice only amplifies it. By removing his name, they created a vacuum. And nature, as you know, abhors a vacuum. The public would notice. The press would dig. The whispers would spread. Let me ask you this. If you were in Charles's place, would you have signed that paper? Would you have chosen the crown over your child? Or would you have risked weakening the monarchy by keeping him in? There's no easy answer. But that's the tension at the heart of this story. The stroke of the pen was not the end. It was the beginning of fallout, of fury, of a storm that no one could contain. Because when the ink dried, the monarchy had crossed a line. And lines, once crossed, cannot be redrawn. Harry's erasure from that decree was like a match dropped in dry grass. Quiet at first, almost invisible, but soon sparks, then flames, then a roaring fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. And yet, before the flames came the silence, the eerie stillness of that room, the trembling hand of a king, the steel gaze of a sister, and the soundless absence of a son's name. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it mean when a name vanishes? Not whispered away, not forgotten over time, but deliberately omitted from the very records meant to preserve royal legacy forever. Imagine opening a document that will define the monarchy for generations, and there it is, every key figure accounted for. Except one, the name of a prince, the name of a son, the name of a brother. Gone, deliberately left in the shadows. That's where we pick up the vanished name, the erasure of Prince Harry. Let me ask you, what's worse? Being criticized publicly, dragged through headlines, mocked, and shamed? or being ignored entirely. To vanish from the records of your own family, from the very system that raised you. That's not just rejection. That's obliteration. And this is exactly what happened. Harry's name, once etched into the very fabric of royal decrees, was now absent. He wasn't a footnote. He wasn't an afterthought. He wasn't there at all. For someone who grew up believing that his worth was defined by blood and tradition, this was nothing short of devastating. Now, here's where we must pause. Why does a royal decree matter so much? Why does one missing name feel like the end of the world? Because royal decrees are more than paper. They are the monarchy's heartbeat, pulsing through centuries. They record not just duty, but identity. They tell the world, here is who belongs. Here is who matters. And when your name is missing, the message is crystal clear. You are no longer one of us. Think about Harry's life for a moment. He was born into the institution. He didn't ask for it. He didn't apply for it. From his very first breath, he was inextricably tied to the crown. His name appeared on baptismal records, school enrollments, military rosters, and countless official documents stamped with the royal seal. The boy was royal to his bones. And yet here, in this decree, the institution said otherwise. Contradiction after contradiction builds the tension. On one hand, Harry is forever Diana's son, Charles's boy, William's brother. He is blood. You cannot change that. But on the other hand, the monarchy isn't about blood alone. It's about recognition, power, status. And recognition can be given or withdrawn. The crown decides who counts, who matters, who is remembered. Now picture Harry discovering the truth. We don't know exactly how he learned, but let's imagine. A phone call late at night. A quiet whisper from someone still loyal inside the palace. Maybe a journalist reaching out for comment. Did you know your name is missing? The words alone would freeze him. Missing? How can I be missing? I'm his son. But the confirmation comes. The decree is signed, sealed, official. His name is nowhere to be found. How would you feel? Anger? Shock? Betrayal? Maybe all at once. Because let's be honest, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't bureaucracy. This was a message. And the message was as cold as stone. You don't belong anymore. But here's the irony. Harry has always wrestled with belonging. Remember his own words. I've never really felt part of it. Even as a child, he was branded the spare, the backup, the extra. Yet being spare still meant being there. Still meant having a place, however secondary. To vanish from the decree was worse. It was as if even the spare part had been discarded, thrown into the dustbin of history. And what about Meghan? Imagine being Meghan in that moment. She had long accused the palace of cruelty, of silencing, of exclusion. And here it was, proof in black and white. Her husband's name, her children's father, erased from the royal record. To Meghan, this would be vindication. Proof that the monarchy wasn't just indifferent, but hostile. Proof that her family was targeted. And perhaps, in her mind, proof that Diana's fate was repeating itself. History devouring the ones who dared to challenge it. But here's where the contradictions bite even harder. If the monarchy truly wanted to erase Harry, why not go further? Why not strip him of his titles outright? Why not publicly announce his removal? Why act quietly, in silence, hiding the act behind palace walls? Perhaps because they feared the backlash. Perhaps because they wanted the erasure to be permanent, but subtle. A missing name doesn't grab headlines immediately, but it grows louder with time, like a whisper spreading through corridors until it becomes a roar. And what about the children? Archie and Lilibet. If Harry's name is absent from decrees, what does that mean for them? Do they inherit erasure too? Are they excluded by extension? That's the chilling thought. That erasure is not just about one man, but about an entire branch of the family tree cut off at the root. Let me ask you directly, what do you think hurts more? To be publicly attacked, or to be quietly erased? To be criticized, or to be forgotten? That's the cruel paradox Harry now faces. But here's the twist you might not expect. In trying to erase Harry, the monarchy may have given him something he never had before, freedom. Think about it. As long as his name was on those decrees, he was bound by them, tied to a system he couldn't fully escape. But once erased, he was unshackled, free to define himself on his own terms, free to tell his story without obligation to the crown. It's ironic, isn't it? That erasure can sometimes be liberation. Still, liberation comes with a sting. Because even if Harry gains freedom, the wound of being erased by his own father and his own aunt cuts deep. It's a wound that bleeds into every relationship, every interview, every public move he makes. And it's a wound that will not heal quickly. But the real shock isn't just Harry's absence. It's who made sure of it. Because and wasn't a passive witness. She was the backbone of this decision. And her hand in Harry's erasure may be more significant than Charles's own. Which leads us to the next chapter. Why would Princess and the loyal, dutiful, unflinching daughter of Elizabeth II insist on erasing her own nephew? What role did she really play? And what did she say behind those palace doors that convinced Charles to go through with it? The truth of Anne's hidden hand is darker than you think. And once you see it, you'll never look at her the same way again. Why would Princess Anne, the famously dutiful daughter of Elizabeth II, turn her sharp gaze on her own nephew and decide he no longer belonged in the family record? What drove her to stand beside Charles, nodding firmly as his trembling hand signed Harry's erasure into history? That's where the shadows thicken. This wasn't just Charles's decree. This was Anne's decree too, the hidden hand of the Princess Royal, and has always been called the hardest working royal. She doesn't indulge in glitz, rarely complains, and has spent her life in the background doing the jobs nobody else wanted. She is, in many ways, the embodiment of what the monarchy wants to project: discipline, grit, no-nonsense service. Yet that very discipline, that steel spine, may have turned her into Harry's fiercest critic. Let me ask you, when you picture Anne, do you see warmth? Or do you see duty? She has never been known for soft words. Even as a child, she was blunt, unyielding. She spoke her mind, even when it clashed with her mother's polished diplomacy. And so, when Harry broke away, when Meghan sat across from Oprah unleashing accusations that rocked the monarchy, who do you think took it hardest? Who do you think saw it not as a family dispute, but as an act of war against the crown? Anne. Always Anne. Here's the contradiction that makes this story cut so deep. Anne adored Diana in public, but privately, she was said to be skeptical of her dramatics. She admired Meghan's confidence at first, but quickly lost patience with her supposed disruptions. Time and again, Anne's pattern has been clear: loyalty to the institution above all else. Blood is secondary. Feelings are irrelevant. Survival of the monarchy is everything. So when the moment came to decide Harry's fate on that parchment, Anne's role was not passive. Palace whispers suggest she was the one who spoke with Charles late at night, pressing him. He has left us no choice. This must be done. Imagine that conversation. A sister speaking not just as family, but as the monarchy's soldier. The father hesitating, torn between love and legacy, and the sister pushing him to choose legacy. Ask yourself, do you think Charles would have done it alone? Or was Anne the decisive force, the one who tipped the scales? Because Charles has always been hesitant, indecisive even. He wrestled with divorcing Diana. He hesitated in confronting scandal. He wavered in reshaping the monarchy. But Anne, she doesn't waver. She acts. And in this case, she acted with brutal clarity. But here's the irony that burns. Anne's entire reputation rests on her being invisible, the one who doesn't seek attention, the one who avoids spectacle. Yet in this act, she may have committed the most visible betrayal of them all. By signing away her nephew's name, and ensured her shadow would fall over Harry's future forever. And think about what that means for Harry. To be erased by his father is one thing. That wound alone could crush any man. But to realize his aunt, the woman who grew up beside his mother, who stood at Diana's funeral, who watched him as a boy, was complicit, that deepens the wound. That transforms it into a scar. Here's where it gets more complicated. Anne's life has been one long contradiction. She was the rebel of her generation, the one who rejected fancy titles for her own children. She wanted Peter and Zara to live outside the gilded cage, free of royal duties. She hated the idea of them being shackled to the monarchy. And yet here she was, shackling Harry's future not by binding him tighter, but by cutting him loose. Can you see the contradiction? She gave her children freedom by rejecting the system, but denied Harry freedom by erasing his very name. Why? Because Peter and Zara never embarrassed the monarchy. They never sold stories to Netflix. They never sat with Oprah. They never accused the institution of racism and cruelty. Harry did. In Anne's eyes, that was unforgivable. But here's the twist no one talks about. Anne's role as the hidden hand is not just about discipline. It's about fear. She lived through the Diana years. She saw how one woman could destabilize the monarchy. And when she looked at Harry and Meghan, she saw history repeating. Anne's mission, then, was simple: stop it before it destroys the crown. To her, erasing Harry's name was not cruelty. It was protection. But ask yourself, protection for whom? For the monarchy? Or for her own legacy? Because Anne knows she won't be here forever. She knows history will judge her, just as it judged Elizabeth, Charles, Diana. Maybe, just maybe, she wanted her final act to be remembered as decisive. A guardian protecting the crown from rebellion. But in doing so, she ensured she'd be remembered as the aunt who erased her nephew. And here's the emotional sting. Imagine Harry replaying it in his mind. His father signing the decree. His aunt watching closely, ensuring the name was gone. The betrayal layered on betrayal. Family, the very people who should protect you, turned executioners. What would Diana think? That question haunts this moment. Would she see Anne's actions as ruthless necessity, or as the final betrayal of the family she once trusted? And yet, beneath the ruthlessness, there is a haunting irony. By trying to erase Harry, Anne may have given him his greatest weapon. Because now, the story isn't just Harry versus Charles. It's Harry versus the entire institution embodied by Anne herself. And when the world discovers Anne's hidden hand, the sympathy may not land where she expects. It may not protect the monarchy at all. It may ignite a firestorm. But this firestorm was only just beginning. Because what followed Anne's involvement wasn't silence. It wasn't peace. It was confrontation. A showdown within the palace walls. Words were spoken that could never be taken back. Voices were raised that echoed through the corridors of history. And at the heart of it, one phrase from Charles himself would shatter the room. A showdown inside palace walls. Imagine it. Thick curtains drawn, guards at the doors, the weight of centuries pressing down on every word. This wasn't the grand ballroom filled with glittering chandeliers and golden chairs. This was smaller, tighter, more suffocating. A war room disguised as a sitting room. And inside it, three figures: King Charles, Princess Anne, and Prince William. The subject? Prince Harry. The verdict? Still hanging in the air like a guillotine waiting to drop. Let me ask you, can words cut deeper than swords? Because what unfolded in that room wasn't just a family conversation. It was a knife fight made of words, sharpened by years of resentment, betrayal, and silence. Charles began hesitantly. That's always been his way. He clears his throat, adjusts his cufflinks, looks down at his notes. Even as king, he has never been a natural commander in personal matters. His strength lies in speeches read from paper, in carefully rehearsed gestures. But here, there was no script, no teleprompter, just raw emotion. Something has to be done, he finally said. His voice cracked, more from conflict than age. And sat across from him, her eyes unblinking, her jaw tight. She didn't need to speak. Her silence screamed louder than words. William leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face a mask of restrained tension. He was listening, weighing, calculating, and broke the silence first. We cannot keep pretending. He made his choice when he walked away. No hesitation, no mercy. To her, this wasn't betrayal of family. It was betrayal of the crown. And betrayal demands consequence. But Charles, the father, fought against Charles, the king. He's still my son, he whispered. The words fell heavy, fragile. You could almost hear the ghost of Diana in them. The boy she left behind, the child she begged him to protect, and didn't flinch. Then you must choose, Charles. Son or sovereign. You cannot be both. Can you imagine that moment? A brother and sister, children of Elizabeth II, arguing not about politics, not about treaties, but about blood, about whether to erase one of their own. And then, William finally spoke. We've done everything we can, he said quietly. His voice didn't rise, but his words landed like blows. He's dragged us through the mud. He's accused us of things we cannot forgive. The monarchy won't survive if we keep him tied to it. We all know this. It was a cold assessment. No rage, no tears, just the pragmatism of a man who knows he will one day sit on the throne. And yet, beneath the calmness, there was bitterness. This was his brother, his partner in childhood mischief, the boy who once called him Willie with laughter in his eyes. And here he was, quietly endorsing his erasure. Ask yourself, what does it feel like to hear your own family weigh your worth like that? To know they see you not as a son, a brother, a nephew, but as a liability, a problem to be solved. But the confrontation wasn't done. Charles rose to his feet, pacing, his face flushed red, his hands shaking. You don't understand, he snapped, his voice breaking. I swore to your mother, Diana, I would protect him, that I would never let this happen. Silence fell, the kind of silence that cuts into bone, and leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. William looked away, his jaw clenching. For the first time in the room, Charles wasn't speaking as king. He was speaking as a father haunted by a promise he couldn't keep. And then came the phrase, the one that shattered the room. Charles slammed his hand on the table, his voice raw with pain. But he's no longer my son in the eyes of the crown. Can you feel the sting of those words? Spoken not in public, not to cameras, but behind closed doors. Words he perhaps never thought would leave that room. Words that fractured more than just the meeting. They fractured the very soul of the family. And nodded grimly. William sat frozen, absorbing the finality of it. The decision, in that moment, was made. Harry would be erased. His name struck out. His role eliminated. But here's the contradiction. Even as Charles said it, even as and nodded, even as William stayed silent, none of them believed it entirely. Because blood cannot be erased. Promises cannot be unmade. And words spoken in anger echo louder than any decree. Now think of the ripple effect. That phrase, that declaration, didn't stay locked in the room. Whispers travel fast in palaces. Servants hear. Advisors murmur. Journalists catch wind. And soon, the world would learn that the king himself had declared his son erased, not just from paper, but from heart. So here we are. A father torn apart, a sister resolute, a brother silent. A showdown that ended not in compromise, but in cold, cruel clarity. Harry was no longer part of the royal machine. Not in ink, not in name, not in decree. But if the crown erased Harry, what did that make him? A free man? Or a ghost, wandering, cut adrift, forever outside the palace gates? That answer would come not from Charles, not from Anne, not from William. It would come from Harry himself. And when he finally spoke, the world would never forget his response. The phrase echoed like thunder. But he's no longer my son in the eyes of the crown. Cold, final, crushing. That single sentence slammed the door on Prince Harry's place in royal history. And so we arrive at the cruel truth, the spare no more. For decades, Harry's identity had been wrapped in one word, spare. A single syllable that defined his life. He wasn't the heir, that was William. He wasn't the first choice, the golden child, the future of the monarchy. He was the backup, the insurance policy, the shadow standing behind the spotlight. The heir and the spare, a phrase repeated endlessly in the press, whispered in the halls of power, even joked about by Harry himself. But being the spare came with a paradox. It was both a burden and a safety net. He was always second, always overshadowed, but he was still there, still part of the institution, still woven into its fabric. The monarchy needed him, even if it didn't celebrate him. He had a role. He had a name in the decrees. He had a place. Until now. Can you imagine what it feels like to have even that stripped away? To wake up one morning and discover you are not even the spare anymore. You are nothing. Your name has been erased. Your role deleted. Your existence, in the eyes of the crown, reduced to silence. Let me ask you directly. Which would you prefer? To live your life as the eternal second, forever overshadowed but at least acknowledged? Or to be erased entirely, cast out, as if you never belonged in the first place? Harry's journey has always been a struggle with identity. From his wild teenage years splashed across tabloids, to his proud service in Afghanistan, to his humanitarian work, and finally, to his explosive exit alongside Meghan, every chapter of his life has been about defining who he is. The spare was supposed to mean less. But now, being erased meant nothing. And nothing stings worse than being told you are nothing. Here's the cruel irony. When Harry wrote his memoir, what did he call it? Spare. He embraced the label, wore it like armor. But what happens when even that armor is ripped away? The word that defined you becomes irrelevant. You're not the heir. You're not the spare. You're just erased. And yet, maybe, just maybe, this was liberation in disguise. Because when you are no longer bound by decrees, no longer tied to an institution that doesn't want you? Aren't you free? Free to speak, free to live, free to tell your story without fear of reprisal, free to burn the bridges completely and build a new life on your own terms. That's the contradiction at the heart of Harry's erasure. It was both a punishment and a release. But let's not sugarcoat it. The pain of being struck from a royal decree wasn't just symbolic. It was deeply personal. Imagine Harry sitting in his California home, holding that news in his hands. Meghan pacing in the background, furious, demanding answers. The children sleeping upstairs, oblivious to the storm raging around them. And Harry, silent, staring, the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. What thoughts ran through his mind? Did he replay the funeral of Diana, when he walked behind her coffin at just 12 years old, the world watching, the monarchy needing him to play his part? Did he remember Afghanistan, the years he wore the uniform, the times he nearly lost his life in service of a country that now erased him? Did he think of the charities he founded, the lives he touched, the Invictus Games he built from scratch, now overshadowed by the absence of his name on one decree? This is where the emotional contradiction lies. Harry gave so much to the monarchy, even when it hurt him. And yet, in return, the monarchy gave him erasure. But what about William? That's the sting. Because William, the heir, remains firmly in place. His name will always be etched into decrees, records, and history books. And Harry, once the shadow to William's light, is now gone completely. Do you see the contrast? One brother immortalized, the other obliterated. Ask yourself, was this inevitable? Could Harry have chosen differently? If he had stayed silent, endured the slights, played the part of the obedient spare, would his name still be there? Probably. But then again, would he even be himself? Because Harry's rebellion, his decision to walk away, to speak out, to challenge the monarchy, was the very thing that gave him identity beyond being the spare. He found his voice. And yet, finding that voice cost him his place. But here's the twist. The monarchy's attempt to erase him may have backfired. Because erasure creates questions. And questions create curiosity. Why was Harry's name missing? What does the monarchy fear? What truth are they trying to silence? And in trying to erase him, they may have ensured his story will never be forgotten. Now, let's consider Meghan's role in this moment. For her, Harry's erasure was proof of everything she had been saying. Proof that the monarchy is ruthless. Proof that family means nothing to them. Proof that the institution would rather cut out its own blood than face uncomfortable truths. In Meghan's eyes, this wasn't just betrayal, it was confirmation. And that confirmation lit a fire in her. She wouldn't let this erasure pass quietly. She would fight back, loudly, publicly, and strategically. But Harry? He wasn't ready for fury. Not yet. His pain was too raw, his shock too deep. He needed time to process. To grieve not just his name on a piece of paper, but his entire identity as a royal. Because being erased from a decree wasn't just a political act. It was the symbolic death of the spare. And Harry, for the first time in his life, had to ask himself, if I am not the heir, and I am not the spare, then who am I? And that question, the one that kept him awake at night, was about to explode into the public arena. Because Meghan's fury would not be contained. And her next move would throw fuel on the fire already raging between Harry and the crown. If Harry felt erased, Meghan felt betrayed. And betrayal, for Meghan Markle, doesn't come quietly. It comes with fire, with strategy, with a vengeance sharpened by years of feeling silenced. The moment she realized her husband's name had been deliberately removed from the royal decree, it wasn't just pain that surged through her, it was fury. Ask yourself, what happens when someone who has spent years warning the world about the cruelty of the monarchy finally has proof? Proof not whispered in the corridors, not speculated by tabloids, but written in ink, sealed with a royal crest. Meghan saw it not just as an attack on Harry, but on her, on their children, on everything they had fought for since leaving the palace gates behind. Picture the scene in their California mansion. The sun setting over Montecito, the golden light casting long shadows across the living room. Harry, sitting in silence, staring at the news with a vacant look. Meghan pacing, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her voice rising with every word. They erased you, Harry. They erased you, she said, her anger filling the room. He didn't respond at first. He couldn't. The silence between them was deafening. Meghan's fury wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. She knew what this meant for their image. For years, the palace had painted them as self-absorbed, dramatic, ungrateful. Now, with Harry erased, Meghan had ammunition. "This is proof," she hissed, clutching the paper. "They don't want you. They don't want us. They never did." But here's the contradiction. For Meghan, erasure was confirmation. For Harry, it was devastation. He still saw the father behind the king, the aunt behind the stern mask. He still longed for reconciliation, for a flicker of love buried beneath the crown's cold exterior. Meghan didn't. For her, this was the final nail in the coffin. Let me ask you directly. If you were Meghan, would you fight back publicly? Would you launch an all-out offensive against the monarchy that erased your husband? Or would you stay silent, letting the erasure speak for itself? Meghan chose the first. She began making calls. Publicists, journalists, Hollywood allies, friends who could plant whispers in the right places. The story needed to get out. And it did. Within days, whispers about the missing names spread like wildfire. Articles appeared with sharp headlines. Harry's erasure from decree sparks outrage. Talk shows debated it. Social media erupted. Meghan's fury had crossed oceans. And here's the shocking twist. Buried deep in the language of the decree was a clause so subtle most people missed it at first. It read, in effect, that only those named herein shall be considered in matters of representation and succession consultation. A bland sentence on paper, but in reality, a guillotine. Because by naming only William and a handful of others, the decree effectively erased Harry's entire line. Not just him, but Archie and Lilibet too. Think about that. The grandchildren of the king, Diana's bloodline, erased not with ceremony, not with public explanation, but with a legal technicality hidden in dense language. It wasn't just punishment. It was extermination of a branch of the family tree. Legal experts exploded into debate. Some argued the clause was unconstitutional, that no decree could override the act of settlement or Parliament's authority. Others pointed out that the monarchy has always wielded immense power in shaping its internal structures. It may not change the line of succession itself, one constitutional scholar noted, but it changes everything about recognition and representation. And in monarchy, perception is reality. Let me ask you, what do you think hurts more? To be told you are not loved, or to be told you no longer exist in the law that defines your family? Harry, Meghan, Archie, Lilibet, gone, with the stroke of a pen. Now here's the contradiction that tears at the heart. On one hand, the monarchy claims to be modern, compassionate, a family adapting to a new age. On the other hand, they use the coldest tool imaginable, legal exclusion, to erase their own. Modern compassion wrapped in medieval cruelty. Imagine Harry reading the legal analysis as it flooded the press. Every headline screaming, "Harry's children erased." Every expert confirming what Meghan had always feared, that the institution had no place for them. Imagine his fury, his heartbreak, his helplessness. Because once something is written into law, it is not easily undone. And yet, this legal strike carried risks. Because the monarchy's strength is not just in law, it's in loyalty. By erasing Harry legally, they risked erasing public sympathy too. And sympathy, once lost, cannot be signed back into existence. Let's not forget Diana. The public adored her because she represented humanity over hierarchy. And now, decades later, her son's children were being erased by the very system she once fought against. The public couldn't help but see the ghost of Diana in this moment. Was this what she warned about? Was this the cruelty she feared? The press had a field day. Headlines grew more brutal by the hour. King cut son from Crown records. Archie and Lilibet, royals no more. Anne's iron hand in Harry's erasure. The monarchy tried to stay silent, but silence only fueled the fire. The legal weight of the decree became a scandal bigger than Charles, bigger than, and bigger even than William. It became a question about the monarchy itself. Because if they could erase Harry, could they erase anyone? Could they one day erase entire branches of the family, rewrite the line as they saw fit? The precedent was chilling. And suddenly, the monarchy looked less like a timeless institution and more like a ruthless corporation cutting staff. And here's where the emotional stakes peak. For Harry, this wasn't just about being cast out. It was about his children growing up in a world where their grandfather had legally declared them invisible. Can you imagine telling Archie, someday, that his name was never written, that his place was denied? Can you imagine explaining to Lilibet that though she carried Diana's name, the monarchy refused to recognize her? That's the wound no legal document can heal. But the monarchy had underestimated one thing: the people. The British public, long weary of scandals, were suddenly confronted with something bigger than drama. They were confronted with law. And law feels permanent. Law feels merciless. Law feels cruel. Public outrage boiled over. Protests flared outside the palace gates. Social media burned with hashtags demanding justice for Harry's children. Polls showed plummeting support for the monarchy's handling of the situation. The institution thought it could quietly erase one man and his family. Instead, it set off a firestorm that threatened its very legitimacy. And just when it seemed the outrage couldn't get worse, it did. Because the public wasn't the only audience watching. Across the Atlantic, America roared. And the U.S. reaction turned this quiet legal strike into a global scandal Buckingham Palace could no longer contain. How do you tell the world their prince has been erased? How do you reveal that a name once etched into history has been struck out by his own father, signed off by his own aunt, and sealed away in royal parchment? The answer is, you don't. You try to bury it. You try to hide it behind palace walls in silence. But secrets have a way of clawing their way into daylight. And when Harry's erasure finally broke into the public arena, Britain erupted. Picture the moment. It starts small. A morning paper with a bold headline: Harry missing from decree. A coffee shop chatter, a muttered, "Did you see this?" A commuter scrolling Twitter, stopping dead at the hashtag erased prince. And then it spreads. Lunchtime debates in pubs. Primetime television panels shouting over one another. Within hours, it's no longer a whisper. It's the nation's obsession. Let me ask you, what would you feel if you woke up to read that a father had erased his son from his family's future? Would you call it duty or betrayal? Would you see a king protecting the crown or a father destroying his bloodline? That's exactly the split that tore through Britain. Some defended Charles. They said Harry asked for this, that he burned bridges, that he chose California over crown. Actions have consequences, one caller told a BBC radio host. You can't have your cake and eat it. Others, though, were horrified. He's still his son, another caller cried. You don't erase your child, no matter what. And then came the protests. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered with signs, "Bring back Harry. Diana's son matters." Chants echoed against the gates. Tourists watched in shock as the monarchy, usually shrouded in ceremony and quiet reverence, became the target of public fury. But here's the irony. The monarchy has always relied on silence to survive. Silence in the face of scandal. Silence in the face of grief. Never complain, never explain. That's the Windsor motto. Yet in this case, silence was gasoline. Every day the palace stayed quiet, the outrage grew. And the more the monarchy refused to explain, the more the public believed they had something terrible to hide. The tabloids, sensing blood, went wild. They printed side-by-side photos. Charles with a pen in his hand, Harry looking lost in California, Diana smiling with her sons. The narrative was simple. The king had erased Diana's boy. You can't fight that kind of imagery. It hits the heart, not the head. Now think about the emotional contradiction. Charles believed erasure would stabilize the monarchy, remove a liability, strengthen the future. Instead, it weakened him. The very act of trying to cut out Harry made Harry the center of attention again. The monarchy tried to silence him, and in doing so, gave him the loudest platform imaginable, public outrage. And Harry? Imagine what it felt like watching this from afar. On one hand, pain. The world discussing his erasure as if it were a sporting event, strangers debating whether he deserved to exist in royal records. On the other, vindication, the people chanting his name, demanding justice, holding up signs with Diana's face. Harry had always wanted to be seen not as the spare, but as himself. And now, ironically, through erasure, he had become the most visible of them all. But here's where it twists further. The fury wasn't confined to Britain. The Commonwealth began to stir. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, questions were asked. If the crown can erase its own, what does that mean for us? Politicians used it as ammunition, activists as proof that the monarchy was outdated. What began as one missing name now threatened to fracture ties across the globe. And then, America roared. Meghan's homeland. Harry's new base. Hollywood, media, politicians, everyone had something to say. American morning shows called it the coldest betrayal in royal history. Oprah's network revisited clips from her bombshell interview with Meghan, framing the erasure as confirmation of everything she'd warned. Celebrities tweeted their support. Meghan's allies spoke out in op-eds. And suddenly, what had been a British scandal was a global one. But ask yourself this: did Charles not see this coming? Did and not anticipate the fury? Or did they believe the world would quietly accept the crown's authority? If so, they miscalculated. Because this wasn't the 1800s. This was the age of social media, of hashtags, of 24-hour news cycles. You cannot erase a man in silence and expect the world to look away. The contradictions deepened. Some Britons argued the outrage proved why Harry had to go, that his name was a distraction, a liability, a destabilizer. Others argued the outrage proved why he should never have been erased, that the people still loved him, still saw him as Diana's son, still wanted him recognized. The monarchy had tried to create certainty. Instead, they created chaos. And chaos, once unleashed, spreads. Here's where the story sharpens into its next act. Because while Britain seethed, while America rallied, while the Commonwealth questioned, one question burned brighter than all others. Why now? Why erase Harry at this exact moment, in such a ruthless way? The answer, whispered but undeniable, tied back to Charles's health, to succession, to urgency. But the fury of the public was only one front in this battle. Another front was about to open. Because the world wanted to know, if William was silent, what did that mean for the monarchy's future? And if Harry was erased, what did that mean for his children? And just when it seemed the anger couldn't grow louder, the American reaction turned personal. Meghan and Harry were about to be thrust into a spotlight brighter than they had ever known. And Hollywood, the very place they sought refuge, was about to make them the center of its stage. From California mansions to Capitol Hill hearing rooms, the erasure of Harry's name didn't just spark outrage, it turned into an American obsession. If Britain erupted with fury, America erupted with fascination. Because for the U.S., this wasn't just another royal scandal. This was personal. This was their Meghan, their Harry, their adopted royals being cast out. Let me ask you, what happens when a monarchy that once dazzled America with fairy tale weddings and Diana's charm suddenly turns its back on the very couple that America embraced as its own? You get headlines. You get outrage. You get the U.S. factor. American morning shows lit up with the story. Good Morning America, today, CBS This Morning, they all led with it. Prince Harry erased from decree. The anchors said, their voices tinged with disbelief. Clips of Harry with Meghan in California, smiling with their children, ran alongside stern photos of Charles and Anne. The contrast was striking: warmth versus coldness, love versus duty, America versus monarchy. And then Hollywood weighed in. Meghan's allies, actors, producers, talk show hosts, began speaking out. A famous actress tweeted, "You don't erase your child. Ever." A late-night host mocked the monarchy as an outdated soap opera with crowns. Documentaries revisited Diana's life, drawing parallels between her treatment and Meghan's. America had always adored Diana. Now, they rallied behind her son. But here's where it gets political. U.S. politicians began to comment. Senators tweeted in support of Harry. A congresswoman called it a disgraceful act of cruelty. On Capitol Hill, whispers began about whether the U.S. government should continue to afford the monarchy the same reverence it once had. After all, if a king could erase his own blood, why should Americans treat the institution as untouchable? Now think about Meghan. For years, she had painted herself as the outsider who dared to speak truth to power, only to be silenced. The erasure was vindication. Proof. In her mind, everything she'd said about cruelty, about exclusion, about racism, was now confirmed in ink. She seized the moment. Public appearances became more frequent, interviews carefully timed, statements sharpened with fury. She framed the erasure not just as a family betrayal, but as a human rights issue. Every child deserves recognition, one ally said on her behalf. even royal children. Harry, though, was torn. Imagine the contradiction tearing at him. America embraced him, lifted him, called him a victim of cruelty. Yet across the ocean, his father was ailing, his brother silent, his aunt unflinching. Part of him wanted to grieve privately. Another part knew the tide had turned. Silence would make him complicit in his own erasure. Let me ask you, what would you do in his shoes? Accept the embrace of America and let Britain turn cold? Or fight for recognition in the country that rejected you? But the U.S. reaction didn't stop at sympathy. It became spectacle. Meghan and Harry were invited to major Hollywood events. Talk show invitations flooded in. Streaming platforms whispered about new projects, documentaries, dramatizations, even films based on the erased prince. America didn't just sympathize. It monetized. And here's the irony. By trying to erase Harry, the monarchy made him bigger than ever in America. He wasn't just Diana's boy anymore. He was the wronged son, the cast-out prince, the rebel who fought back. In America, that's not scandal, it's legend. But the contradiction deepened. The more America celebrated Harry, the more Britain turned against him. Polls showed rising sympathy for Charles and at home, as some Britons bristled at America's meddling. We don't need Hollywood telling us how to run our monarchy, one commentator sneered. The gap between Harry's two worlds widened. California sunshine and British rain pulling him in opposite directions. And yet, the U.S. factor was impossible for the monarchy to ignore. When Oprah's team hinted at a second sit-down with Meghan and Harry, Palisades panicked. When American news outlets ran exposés on Charles's health and Anne's iron hand, palace courtiers scrambled. For the first time in years, the monarchy wasn't just managing a domestic scandal. It was fighting a transatlantic war of perception. But America wasn't finished. Because Hollywood doesn't just sympathize, it dramatizes. Rumors swirled of a major studio developing a series based on Diana's legacy, with Harry and Meghan portrayed as the heirs to her spirit, and Charles and as villains of the old guard. Whether true or not, the whispers alone rattled the palace. And then came the moment that sealed the U.S. factor's power. At a star-studded charity gala in Los Angeles, Meghan took the stage. She didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. But her words hit like arrows. Every child deserves a place in their family, she said, her voice steady, her eyes glistening. The audience rose to its feet, applauding, cameras flashing, headlines writing themselves. The message was clear. Harry's erasure wasn't just Britain's scandal anymore. It was America's cause. But causes can be dangerous. Because while America rallied, Hollywood whispered, and Meghan sharpened her voice, the palace prepared its counterattack. The monarchy had weathered Diana. They had weathered scandals, divorces, affairs. They would weather Harry and Meghan too. And their weapon wouldn't be silence this time. It would be exposure. Because Hollywood wasn't the only one ready to dramatize this story. Buckingham Palace was about to leak something of its own. Something that would cast Meghan not as the victim, but as the villain. And when Hollywood's reckoning collided with the palace's counterpunch, the firestorm grew into an inferno. When you live by the spotlight can burn you. That's the brutal truth Harry and Meghan discovered when Hollywood, once their sanctuary, their stage, their safety net, turned its blinding light back on them. What started as sympathy, as applause, as standing ovations, slowly shifted into scrutiny. This was Hollywood's reckoning. At first, Meghan and Harry were the darlings of Los Angeles. Invites to the most exclusive galas. Red carpets rolled out. Producers calling with offers. Netflix showering them with millions. The image was clear. Diana's son and his American wife were Hollywood royalty. But here's the contradiction. Hollywood loves a hero, but it also loves a fall. And when whispers from Buckingham Palace began to mingle with Hollywood gossip, the applause turned into murmurs. Let me ask you, how long can any celebrity ride sympathy before it flips into suspicion? The answer is, not long. And Meghan knew it. The first cracks came with the Netflix deal. The massive contract they signed, once hailed as groundbreaking, now looked strained. Projects delayed, executives grumbling, stories leaked about Meghan's difficult behavior on set. Headlines shifted from admiration to mockery. Sussex's struggle to deliver content. Late-night hosts cracked jokes. The narrative was slipping. And then came the leaks. Whispers from palace insiders, deliberately timed, strategically placed. Meghan pushed for public war over Harry's erasure, one tabloid claimed. Hollywood uneasy with her anger, another reported. Whether true or not, perception mattered. The palace, silent in public, had found a weapon. Feed Meghan's fury to the Hollywood machine. Let it do the damage for them. Now think about the irony. Meghan, who once leveraged Hollywood's power to amplify her voice, was now at its mercy. The very industry that cheered her could just as easily turn her into the villain of her own story. And Hollywood loves villains almost as much as it loves heroes. Harry, meanwhile, found himself caught between worlds. In America, he was the erased prince, the tragic son, Diana's boy wronged by the crown. But in Hollywood, sympathy was thinning. Executives asked hard questions. Can he deliver? Can he sell? Or is he just scandal without substance? The cruel reality of the industry set in. Fame isn't forever, and sympathy isn't a business model. But here's where the contradictions sharpen. Meghan wanted to fight louder, push harder, seize the narrative. Harry wanted to retreat, to breathe, to heal. She pushed for interviews. He resisted. She drafted statements. He stayed silent. Two strategies colliding under the same roof, each born of pain but pulling them in opposite directions. And Hollywood noticed. At first, they were a united front. Now, whispers circulated. They're not on the same page. Paparazzi photos were analyzed frame by frame. Was Harry distant? Was Meghan controlling? The same kind of microscopic scrutiny that once hounded Diana now stalked her son and his wife. Let me ask you, who controls a story? The one who speaks the loudest, or the one who says nothing? Meghan believed in speaking. Harry believed in silence. The palace exploited both. Because while Hollywood wrestled with its love-hate relationship with the Sussexes, the palace quietly leaked more. Stories about staff resignations, about Meghan's temper, about